Hello, I'm Andy Lazur. I'm a water quality specialist with the University of Maryland Extension, and I'll be discussing farm well and septic system care. First thing I'd like to share with you is the hydrologic or the water cycle, which is basically saying that our water is connected and is continually recycled as we have precipitation, obviously hitting landfall or water. It's washing in various minerals, other potential contaminants into surface waters, but that also then infiltrates into groundwater. And then we use that groundwater obviously for multiple purposes, drinking water, for farming, etc. And then again, any plants that uptake water, they evaporate and transpire water, and then it goes back into forming clouds, and that whole cycle begins. So, but we're also taking it up through our wells for drinking purposes. So it's just important to note that things that fall, precipitation that falls on the land and any sort of contaminant or minerals or whatever the case may be that's in this on the ground or in the soil can reach groundwater, and then we could be picking it up into our well water. Now, when we think about wells, we often think about aquifers, and aquifer is basically just how water is stored, and there's different types of aquifers. Typically, you might be familiar with the shallow water table, for example, and the shallow water table is just that. It's water from precipitation that has filtered down, infiltrated, or percolated down into an area, the water table, which is then restricted from going further by some sort of confining layer. And this is either some sort of compacted soil or very hard, almost impenetrable geology. And so the shallow water tends to be less protected from any surface contamination rather than a confined aquifer. So this aquifer right here is confined because it's protected by this geological confining layer. And so water in confined aquifers tend to be more protected or less at risk from surface contamination, whatever that may be, road salts, fertilizers, any sort of chemical spills, oils, whatever the case may be. So again, we have different types of aquifers. And then here in Maryland on the coastal plain, we have what's called sand and gravel aquifers. And there's literally more than a dozen different types of aquifers on the eastern shore in Maryland. But basically what you have is these confining layers, and that these are the gray here. And then the aquifer itself, the water is stored in between the sand and gravel particles. And as I said, we have literally over a dozen aquifers in the coastal plain area, dependent upon your depth of drilling. In contrast, the Piedmont region has what's called fractured rock geology. And so the water is actually stored in fractures in the geology, or cracks, if you will. And it could be limestone also, and limestone can be eroded and kind of open up almost like a Swiss cheese type of pattern, if you will. But so you have that storage of water in between either the cracks or in these cavities within a limestone area. And the thing to note about fractured rock geology in wells is that it's a lot more hit and miss than in the coastal plain. So if in the coastal plain, you drill down to a certain depth in a certain location, you can be pretty sure that you're tapping into a specific aquifer. In contrast, again, you could drill a well as shown here, and this particular well is tapping into this fracture and this fracture. And this fracture is actually connected to the shallow water table. So this particular well could be at greater risk to surface contamination. And if we had a well, say over here, that was tapped into these fractures, then those fractures are not connected to the surface or the shallow water table, and therefore could be more protected. However, you could also drill a well and only tap into a very small fracture, and therefore you're not getting a lot of water volume. So it's very hit and miss or highly variable. Even in a small community, you go a half mile down the road and that well could be totally different because it's tapped into different fractures. So we'll talk a little bit about drinking water wells, and this is a nice schematic of the well system. Here in particular, we have a drilled well. This one is probably in coastal plain because it has a well screen and the pump, and then this length of casing, whatever that may be. And with a drilled well in the coastal plain, typically the casing goes down to approximately where the motor is. And that submersible pump motor then will lift the water up and into ultimately into your pressure tank or bladder tank. And then as you open a faucet or a valve in your home, then that pressure is then applied and forces the water out into the house. Another really important component of the well is the well cap, and we'll talk more about that. So again, there's several features of a well. It really depends upon where you're located and the depth you're located, but these are common components that you will see with most wells, whether it's in fractured rock or even coastal plain. And this is an important part, and this is something that you can do as a well owner yourself, is actually inspect your well head. Okay, and the well head is the part that sticks above the ground. So what you want to examine is first to see if you have a good sanitary well cap. Okay, and this cap will prevent water or insects from entering the well. You also want to be sure that the ground slopes away from the wellhead. That's an event if you get high water, heavy rains, or even a flood, that the water is moving away from the wellhead and not penetrating down into the actual well. And then every drilled well will also have what's called a grout seal, and they use a bentonite clay material, and they put it around the whole casing, and that provides a mechanism of reducing the risk of surface water from following the path of least resistance along the casing and down into your well. So those are three things that you can check. Do you have a good well cap? Does the ground slope? Do you have any issues with the casing? If it's a metal casing, do you have little pit holes in it? If it's a plastic casing, is it cracked? Did somebody bump into it with a tractor or a lawnmower, whatever the case may be? So those are things that you can do as a homeowner. And here's a picture of a plastic well cap. And you can see inside here this black rubber gasket, which provides that really tight seal against the well casing. And then this is where the electrical conduit comes in. And then these are screened vents, which prevent insects from getting in there, because insects love to get into cracked well caps, and then they do their thing, die, and then they'll fall into your well, and actually that would lead to some contamination, bacterial contamination. So this is a small investment, but it's your first step in protecting your well. So why do you need to care for your well water? Well, certainly one of the things I'd like to say is we've all heard the expression, you are what you eat. I believe since our bodies are 60+ % water, we are what we drink as well. So with well water, it's not a regulated water supply as public water, and therefore the well owner is responsible for your water quality. And that includes keeping your wellhead protected, but also testing, and we'll talk more about that. The other thing is to note that a lot of contaminants, arsenic, lead, and many others do not have any sort of taste or odor. So you would not know if your water is contaminated unless you actually are doing testing. And then again, some of the contaminants can cause health issues, such as gastrointestinal illness if it's bacterial, neurological effects, and even cancer. Again, so some of the metals, manganese, lead, arsenic, radon, some of these others obviously can cause immediate health concerns. And then it's also important to note that certain populations, pregnant women and children, and anybody who is immunocompromised is at greater risk. So basic tips. Okay, one of the things that you can do, depending upon the age of your home, is you may be able to contact your local county health department who permits wells. They may actually have record of what's called your well log. So this is the well completion report. The well driller fills this out. And so it gives you a lot of information, not only when it was dug, but how deep, what size pump that they use, what was the flow rate, things like that. So if you have that information, that would be good. And then the other thing, of course, is to test. Again, as I said, you are responsible. Nobody tests your well water other than yourself. So it's very important to test. And these are recommendations. So we have several parameters here. The ones in red, okay, coliform bacteria, E. coli, and nitrates, we consider these indicators of some sort of contamination with animal waste, whether that be insects, as I mentioned, could be pets, could be wildlife, livestock, or human sewage. And then nitrates may also be in fertilizers. But again, you would if you do have animal waste contamination, most likely you're going to find coliform bacteria, possibly E. coli, and elevated nitrates. And another thing, so this is tested annually, and the reason we do that is to just provide peace of mind and assurance that there is no sort of animal contamination. Groundwater does move, albeit very slowly. So it may be that either new development or whatever is causing some contamination, and it hasn't reached your well, say in previous years, but maybe it could be now. So that's why we say test annually. We suggest that you use a state certified lab. There's a list of those on our website, and they will provide you with all the supplies and instructions and shipping instructions. Typically that suite of coliform, E. coli, and nitrates is, will range from, about $50 some odd to say $75. It just depends upon the lab. If you have not done a well test in many years, it would be good also to test for chloride, your hardness, your pH, lead, copper, manganese, total dissolved solids, sulfates, and any other local contaminant, whether it be natural land activity. And your health department would be able to guide you in that, because we do have in Maryland and many other states naturally occurring deposits of, say, arsenic, radon, or radium. And your local health department says, yes, you're located in an area that may have, natural deposits of one of these. And so you'd want to test for those as well. Manganese is also one that we're finding out a lot more about that is causing some neurological issues with young children. So it's important to test for that as well. I wanted to share a little bit of preliminary results from a partnership project we had with colleagues from the School of Public Health, but a lot of the county ag agents, and where we tested wells, provided some education, and we're still working on that project. But just wanted to share with you some preliminary results. We had a student from School of Public Health, Cameron Smith, that worked on this data, and it shows that 39% of the 67 samples had coliform bacteria, and only 10% had E. coli. So what does that mean? Well, it could be that this coliform bacteria is, again, it could be from insects, it could be some other sort of animal waste, it could be that their well cap is damaged, things like that. So again, if these are present, typically you can then have your well disinfected, for example. We also did some metals here, and it's important to note both the bacteria and these metal results are what we're finding is similar to other private well studies that have been done, nothing out of the ordinary on our farms in particular. Again, it varies depending upon region and the type of well. For example, is it hand dug? Is it drilled? How old is it? What is the condition? What are the natural occurring types of contaminants, or again, what type of geology? So we looked at different regions, 7 regions in the state, and we did find some arsenic, but those were all in the naturally occurring arsenic area. We found a little bit of nitrate, 6%, which is actually low compared to some other studies we've seen. We had about 33% of the wells tested had elevated sodium, and that may not necessarily be a health concern, but it was elevated. And what we did find out was that not quite half of that elevated sodium was due to the use of water softener filters, which you use salt to remove the calcium and magnesium, which causes the scaling and things like that. But it does add chloride and sodium to your water. So interesting results. We're We're still working on that, but I think that's interesting. And then you can also test for other issues. If you see specific problems, for example, if you kind of see some orange or rust colored stains or even black stains, that's indicative of iron and manganese. I mentioned hardness. If you see that film on your glasses, for example, that would be due to elevated calcium or magnesium. And then if you see, for example, pinhole leaks, if you have copper pipe, that is usually a sign of corrosive water. And over time, that water is actually eroding away at the copper pipe, and you may actually see some blue stains, for example. If you notice issues, then you do have some choices of what are the things that you can test for. The good news is that for all these different contaminants that I've talked about, is that there are filters available, whether they're at the sink type of filter, what we call point of use, or in the case of, like, if you do have a need for a water softener, that's a whole house type of filter. So again, there are many types of options. Once you get the test results, I offer advisory services on what sort of treatment may or may not be warranted. But there's also some online tools. For example, Penn State Extension has a drinking water interpretation tool that's friendly to use. You just type in your results, and it kind of provides a meaning of what that means to you, and possibly even what sort of filtration systems you might need. So other types of tips that you can do, again, be mindful of your wellhead and be sure that you're not hitting it with a mower, for example. Try to keep your pets away from it. Emphasize the use of that well cap is very important. The land slopes away from the wellhead. And then even pumping and maintaining your septic tank. Because again, a septic system, and we'll talk about in just a minute, can impact groundwater quality. So typically the rule of thumb is that you pump your septic tank every 3 to 5 years, depending upon the number of occupants in the size tank. But a good rule of thumb is 3 to 5 years. And if you have a BAT unit, then that is being serviced either once or twice a year by the service provider, and they would actually determine when that first compartment of the BAT would need to be pumped. So other tips, again, any sort of use of fertilizers, be sure you're following the label. You're storing it correctly. Certainly you don't want to dump any sort of thing on the ground. Recycle things or properly dispose of it. If you have any underground storage tanks, be sure that they're in good condition. If they're not being used, you may even want to consider having them removed, because over time, a metal tank obviously can rust away, and then it could be leaching out any unused fuel into your groundwater. And then another important thing is to have any abandoned wells properly sealed. And the reason for that is that an abandoned well, as you can see in this photo, you can just imagine if there's anything washing down here, wildlife or livestock manure or whatever, is basically it's a direct conduit to the groundwater, as shown in this particular graphic right here. Again, if it's abandoned and not sealed properly, it's just like again, it's an open chute to pollute that groundwater. And properly sealing a well, an abandoned well, is not simply just filling it up with earth or rock or whatever is available, or even regular concrete. It needs to be properly sealed, and there are companies that do that. So I want to shift gears and talk a little bit about septic systems, because most people that are on wells are also on septic systems, and certainly, the farming community would be on both because of the rural nature. But basically, there's two different types, if you will. We have what's called a conventional septic system, and these basically operate on gravity, where the wastewater is coming from the house into the septic tank, and the septic tank is there basically to provide some storage volume, but it also helps to settle out some of the solids. Any fats, oils, and grease will float up to the top, and then that wastewater that's separated from the solids and the fats will then flow into the second compartment of the tank, and then out into what's called a distribution or D box, and that's simply there to help equally channel the wastewater into the trenches. And these are gravel trenches with perforated pipe, and the gravel is there to help the wastewater evenly distribute quickly over, say, a 3-foot wide area of soil, because it's all about spreading that wastewater over the soil. So as it infiltrates into the soil, it's getting some filtration. But here's an important point to make. Soil is a wonderful biofilter, but it's not 100%. In fact, any wastewater treatment, we are making an impact on groundwater, because no system, municipal plant or septic system, provides 100% treatment of everything within wastewater. So what we want to do is maintain our system as best as we possibly can to get the most purification and filtration we can before that wastewater essentially enters groundwater over time. So that's a conventional system. Then we have what's called an aerobic treatment unit or advanced treatment unit. Here in Maryland, we call it BAT, best available technology. And it's basically like a miniature wastewater treatment plant, if you will, in your backyard. It has multiple compartments. There's 11 different units that are approved in Maryland that have been tested. And this is showing a 4-compartment system here, this basic diagram. Here's an actual picture of a unit right here with 3 access ports. And what you have here is the wastewater comes in. It has this first settling area. The solids settle on the bottom, the fats, oils, and grease float up, just like in the regular septic tank, and then that water then goes to the next chamber. And here is where it becomes aerobic or advanced. We're providing oxygen. We're feeding the beneficial bacteria in there and oxygen, just like they do at a wastewater treatment plant, if you've ever seen treatment lagoons or whatever the case may be, ponds with aerators. It's to provide that oxygen, and that oxygen the bacteria need in order to break down the wastewater, break down the organics, and convert some of the nitrogen compounds, et cetera. And then that aerated wastewater then goes over to another settling chamber. And then depending upon the manufacturer, it then will go, could go back to the first unit again to get additional treatment. And then again leaves the BAT unit and then goes out into the drain field. So a system has 2 components, the tank or the BAT unit and the drain field or disposal system, the soil treatment area, essentially. But it's important to note that the effluent coming out of a BAT unit is clear and odorless. In contrast, septic tank wastewater would be blackish, dark gray, and definitely would have an odor. There's a lot more organic material that the septic tank is sending out into the drain field. And with a BAT unit, you're basically getting not only greater treatment, but we believe because of that greater treatment, your drain field has a longer lifespan because it doesn't have to work as hard with all that organic. And so the soil particles are not getting clogged up as easy over time. So that's one of the other benefits of a BAT unit is much reduced nitrogen and organic issues, but also extended life of the drain field. So the drain fields, again, in a conventional system, that's where the bulk of the treatment occurs. If you have a BAT unit, then the bulk of the treatment is actually occurring within the unit itself, but we have the typical gravel trenches. We have these things called chambers, which are basically half of a 2-foot or so diameter specialized pipe that has vents on the side, but it's basically replaces the gravel. The idea, again, is to distribute it, the wastewater over that as wide a surface area, soil area as possible. We have sand mounds, and typically sand mounds are used where there's a high water table in order to get that necessary treatment depth of soil. And then we actually have shallow placed drip dispersal units. So again, different technologies depending upon the type of setting. So a septic system is designed based on that specific site, the size of the home, but really most importantly is the soil quality and type. And so therefore, when a system is developed, they do a thorough soil evaluation on multiple areas on that particular lot, if you will, in order to determine the soil quality. And that soil quality will then go into the design factors and determine how large of a system that is used. So again, soil is a wonderful biofilter. So why do you want to maintain your septic system? Well, we like to say it's the most expensive appliance in your home. It's more expensive than your HVAC and certainly more expensive than anything you have in your kitchen. oven, refrigerator, whatever the case may be. So, protect it. You're making a big investment here. And if you have to replace it because you didn't take care of it, you could be dishing out a lot of money, thousands to tens of thousands, depending upon the type that would be required. If it's a BAT unit, those units itself, if you don't go through the grant program in Maryland, they're going to cost you $12,000 to $25,000 just for the BAT unit itself. And then if you have to replace your drain field and it's a sand mound, and that's another 20, so again, it adds up. And obviously, if your home has a good functioning septic system, you're protecting your value. Maybe even more importantly, a well-maintained septic system reduces the risk of environmental and public health hazards. So that's very important. So some basic tips: if you have any leaks, like a leaking toilet, fix those, because again, your system is designed to handle a certain amount of water per day. If you're overloading that, then it could be putting a strain on your drain field, for example. Garbage disposals don't work well. And the reason for that is they're potentially could be sending out more organics out into your drain field. And organics can clog soil. Clogged soil in your drain field means that the system will fail. If the water will either surface or it'll go back into the house. Fats, oils, and greases obviously don't drain. Don't dispose of any chemicals. It's okay to use a certain, a normal amount of cleaners, bleach for cleaning, laundry, or whatever the case may be, but you certainly don't want to drain a quarter bottle of unused bleach or something down the drain, because it can be killing the beneficial bacteria in your system. This is very important. Only flush toilet paper, no wipes. Even if they say they're septic friendly or flushable, you can flush a lot of things down a system, but it can mess up your tank, and certainly mess up a BAT and the pumps inside a BAT unit. Toilet paper breaks down very quickly, as you know. Other things do not. And so it's only toilet paper. And then if you have any storm water, whether it's coming off your roof, off the gutters, or even if you have flat land, it's better somehow to channel the water away from your drain field. You do not want standing water over your drain field after a rain, because that means that the drain field has to absorb that extra water. And again, if your drain field is older, it may not be able to handle it very well. And you may notice your toilets or your drains are not flushing or draining quickly, or you may actually see some sort of backup. Don't drive on the drain field. We need good quality natural soil. If you drive over it, you compact it. And in compacted soil, the wastewater cannot infiltrate into it. And then certain trees, most trees actually, the rule of thumb is don't plant trees near, 50 feet away from your drain field. There are some species that are less invasive. I have a list on our website. We have another YouTube about landscaping septic systems that actually talks about which trees to plant and which trees not to plant. Again, I already mentioned, have your tank pumped every 3 to 5 years. And if you have a BAT unit, maintain that service contract and maintain the electric power. Some people have just thought that they could save a little bit of money, $5 to $15 a month, approximately, if they turn off their BAT unit. But that's not doing them any favors. In fact, it may be costing them in the long run, because a BAT unit needs to operate in order to function properly. These are good, solid, basic maintenance tips that'll help prolong the life of your septic system. So with that, I have, there's a wealth of information out there from your county health department. Our website has fact sheets and YouTube videos. There's MDE has a great website, both on-site systems as well as water supply. So I encourage you to take advantage of these resources. And thank you for your time. Please contact me through my email if you have any follow-up questions. Have a good day.